Listen up. There's no more excuses.
We're empowering those who want the hustle by exposing the status quo.
The days of ordinary are over.
It's time to crush mediocrity and start discovering your greatest potential.
Welcome to the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation.
To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle.
Welcome back to another edition of the Hustle Nation podcast. Today, we've got a real treat. In the virtual house today is Mr. Fred Diamond, who's an author, sales coach, podcast host, and president, co-founder of the Institute for Excellence in Sales, IES. IES helps employers around the globe attract, motivate, retain, and elevate top-tier sales talent. Certainly something most businesses need. He's host of the award-winning Sales Game Changers podcast. Fred is also an advocate for chronic Lyme awareness and treatment. He's written multiple blogs for LymeDisease.com. I always want to say Lyme's disease, and has a book coming out in spring of, or has a book out for family members of Lyme disease survivors. So pretty interesting stuff. Fred, welcome to the show.
Gentlemen, I'm excited to be here. Congratulations on the success of the first dozen or so episodes, and I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Appreciate that. We're so glad you're here. So, Fred, before we jump into sales and all that fun business stuff, tell us a little bit about you and your journey.
Yeah, so I run what's called the Institute for Excellence in Sales. And as you mentioned, we have our customers are typically large organizations with large sales teams, at least 50 sales teams, companies like Salesforce, Amazon. We do programs for them. The program that I'm most excited about is our Women in Sales Leadership Forum. About 90% of what we do is focused on corporate women in sales best practices. It's something that's near and dear to me as it relates to also my the personal mission of advocating chronic Lyme disease. So we do programs. We've been around for about 10 years. The early part of my career is in high-tech marketing. I worked for Apple Computer. I worked for Compaq Computer. I should say I'm from Philadelphia originally, so I'm a big everything related to Philadelphia sports with the exception of the Flyers. So it's been a good time to be a Phillies fan and actually an Eagles fan and Sixers as well. So went to college in Atlanta. And like I said, I started my career with Apple Computer and Compaq Computer. I actually lived not too far from you guys in Detroit for a number of years, working for a large software company, but mostly in marketing. I have an MBA in marketing, but it became clear to me relatively quickly that it's about sales. You know, if the transactions don't happen, if the revenue's not coming in, doesn't matter if it's a multi-billion-dollar company or if it's a 3-person organization, if the revenue doesn't come in, then everything is for naught. In about 2002, I went to work as what we now call a fractional chief marketing officer. I called it outsourced at the time. Luckily for me, Microsoft became a client and they assigned me to a lot of their smaller tech companies that were very tech focused, had gotten to a certain point, $1 million to $5 million. And I came on board to help put in a sales and marketing process. And big believer in everything really needs to be focused on driving sales in the company.
How did you get into sales?
So like I mentioned, even before I went to work at Apple, my first job was with McGraw-Hill Publishing. I was the editor of my college newspaper. So I was recruited by McGraw-Hill. And we sold, at the time, they were these loose leaf books. The company was called Data Pro. Now, if you want to learn anything about a computer or a phone, you just type into Google. Back then, the Google was these thick, loose leaf books. So I was an editor in telecom and then data security. We sat right next to the enterprise sales team and I could listen to them. You know, our cubes were right next to theirs. And I would hear these guys, and they were all guys. I would hear them all day long talking about meeting and selling more to the customers and why our products were of value. And even though I thought my career was going to go into editorial, maybe I was going to be an author. I mean, I've become an author, but it took me 40 years to get there. When I heard these guys talking about the value they were bringing to customers, I said, it's about sales. I said, I could be writing anything. And if we don't have these guys on the other side of the cubicle divide, anything I was doing was a waste of time. It was for naught. And I've always appreciated the role that sales plays. And I eventually created the Institute for Excellence in Sales. Most companies, when I was a consultant, were hiring me as a marketing consultant because they had sales problems or revenue generation problems. And I truly believe the hardest job in any organization is sales. When I worked for a company in Detroit called CompuWare in the late 90s, uh, the guy who was the CEO of the company said, and I know that Chris, you spent some time in Michigan. The last person who's going to leave the building when we shut down is going to be our worst salesperson. And I just have that appreciation. Sales, during the pandemic, a lot of people I interviewed for my Sales Game Changers podcast said the organization that's going to bring our company out of this turmoil is going to be the sales organization.
So one of the things that so often happens with sales and marketing, right, is there's this spectrum or even a divide, so to speak, right, of, is this marketing or is this sales? And so with your kind of transition of, marketing to sales and obviously with the Institute, where do you draw that line, or do you not draw that line relative to, sales and marketing, relative to basically getting the opportunity even, right? There's a lot of talk out there about inbound marketing versus outbound sales. It's almost like it's this fight that's out there. I'm just kind of curious on your perspective.
There was a classic article in 2004 in the Harvard Business Review. It was called something like "We Must End the War Between Sales and Marketing." And it was co-authored by Neil Rackham, who wrote a book called Spin Selling, arguably one of the most well-referenced sales guides in the history of professional sales. And I think the other author was Philip Kotler, who was a very huge, well-known. He wrote Channel Marketing and some other books. I'm pretty sure it was Philip Kotler. And it talked about that exact problem. And when I was a marketing director for Apple and Compaq and CompuWare, as a marketing director, I would spend every living breath trying to get on the radar of the sales team, to provide value, to understand what their process was, because marketing needs to help accelerate the sales process in my mind. I think there's still that divide in a lot of places because the processes are different. The sales process is, you got to ask hard questions of your customers. You have to ask them for the next meeting. You have to ask them to become a customer. A lot of people are challenged with that. It's difficult to do. You can create great events from a marketing perspective and great awareness, but if it doesn't lead, I believe, to the corporate goal of more revenue generation or whatever the corporate goal might be, then it truly is a waste of time. I think with the onset of a lot of technology, that a lot of the divide has decreased because we can now interact with our customers more. So the entire organization can interact. The interaction with customers used to be just in the realm of sales. So every other corporate function was about, I think, preparing sales to make it easier to sell without even people realizing that. Now people can get whatever information they want. They could just talk into their phone. They could just say to their phone, and then, the answers come out that they need to know about the most complex things, right? So there's that access. So marketing and sales they're still two distinct functions, but the need for each other has significantly raised.
Fred,
And the awareness of that need.
Yeah.
I come from a marketing background, and so often in the marketing world, and I'm sure this is true in the sales world because I've been in sales as well, is it feels like these big companies work in silos. And so often marketing specifically, I see a huge need right now in talent acquisition and talent retention. And so these people kind of operate on this light switch theory. Oh, we'll just flip a switch and post some jobs and it's going to work. Well, wrong. It doesn't work. But I think marketing in most cases needs to be the leader and work cross-functionally. But yet it's almost like, well, who is HR and who is in programming and who's in sales? Like, it seems odd for these people that they can't work cross-functionally. Do you see that? And how do you coach your clients to change that?
It's definitely still a problem. I mean, if someone works in a company, their main goal, I think, is to keep their job. It's not really to grow the company. It's not to achieve revenue. It really is to keep their job if you're going to be carrying a badge for a particular company. I'll tell you a little bit of a shift. I run the Institute for Excellence in Sales. And prior to the pandemic, my target was VPs of sales because they would join the Institute and they would participate in our programs, either leadership development of their emerging leaders. And we did a lot of live programs. in the Washington, D.C. area and around the country. So I would wake up every morning. We say, what do you think about when you wake up? I would think about getting more sales VPs to become customers of my Institute for Excellence in Sales. Over the last year, I'm now talking to talent acquisition people. I'm talking to HR people. And the other audience that we're spending a lot of time talking to, Chris and Dustin, are DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals, because one of the challenges right now coming out of the pandemic, and because of things that have happened over the last 2.5, 3 years, is companies want to be seen as great employers for diverse audiences, specifically for my purposes in sales. So I never talked to a DE&I person a year ago. I just got off the phone, actually Zoom, with a DE&I professional at a company that you both would be familiar with, because they want honestly to show that their company looks diverse. I'll give you an example. One of our partners at the Institute for Excellence in Sales is a brand that I'm pretty sure both of you know. It's a well-known technology and services brand. And we've been working with this company for years. And they said to us, they just lost a high 7-figure deal because the customer said, you don't look diverse enough. They said, you don't look diverse enough. You don't look like us or our customers who they were serving. And they lost the deal. And they were the incumbent too. So they went back and did some hard looking at themselves and said, we aren't that diverse. So they have made some initiatives to spread out. Now, the challenge is with sales, you still need to hire great salespeople. You can't just hire diversity if they're not going to be helping you achieve your goals. But more and more companies have come to us, which is why our Women in Sales program is thriving. And it's one of the best things I've ever done in my career, is because they want to be seen as attractive destinations for people to go work if they're in sales.
So what I'm hearing you say,
also,
what I'm hearing you say is that through marketing, people are positioning or selling their company as diverse. So they're using marketing as a sales tool.
Exactly. And, millennials, let's just say, people in that age group, if you will, they want to know more than just how much am I going to make as a sales professional. They want to know things like sustainability. How committed is this company to sustainability? And obviously over the last couple of years, they want to know, how flexible are you? Can I work 4 days a week for 10 hours as compared to 5 days? Because of obviously everyone rethinking go to the office versus hybrid versus remote. If you're a woman who has 2 young children and you're still running the house, being able to work from home 2 days a week is a good thing. Are you, employer, willing to do that? Is that part of your processes? I'll give you another example. As part of our Women in Sales, we have a program called the Premier Women in Sales Employer. One of the companies applied, and it's basically to show great companies that are great employers for women. One of the companies put on their application that when they have offsites, sales kickoffs or things like that, it's usually at a resort or a nice hotel. Usually there's like a day of fun at a golf course, right? It's like everyone can play golf from 10 until 4. Well, that sounds like fun if you're a man putting that together. I don't know about you guys, but I would love to spend a day on the golf course. So let's say you're a woman sales leader or even a woman account executive. Let's say you don't play golf. You could say, well, you need to learn how to play golf because that's what salespeople do. Or the company can say, half the people can go play golf, half can go to the spa, right? And then at 6 o'clock, we're going to all meet for dinner. And if men or women want to go to the spa, or men and women want to play golf, it's more of like an equitable thought about what type of an employer that they are.
Love that. I talk so much about that stuff, and it's amazing how half of that conversation is marketing, half of it's sales.
It's when I one of the questions I ask on the Sales Game Changers podcast is, what is the 2 biggest challenges you face as a sales leader? We've done over 600 episodes, and you guys are going to get to that at some point. One of my guests, a guy named Frank Passanante, the senior VP of sales at Hilton, said, everybody's got to deal with hiring and recruiting. It's table stakes. I'll tell you my 2 main challenges besides that. So I changed the question. I said, besides hiring and recruiting, which are table stakes, what are the 2 biggest challenges that you face as sales leaders? And a lot of things that you talked about, the divide there, Dustin, you mentioned, is marketing helping us be more effective as sales professionals? Is the company progressive enough to be putting smart employment processes in place? Those are things people want to know.
Answer is usually no.
One of the things, so at here at McClone, actually, McClone Insurance, one of the things we talk a lot around with sales is there's this misnomer in sales is what you picture on a TV show, right? It's the pushy salesperson convincing somebody to do something they don't want to do. And, really at the end of the day, there is a process to it. There is, training that goes along with it. But in a lot of ways, it starts with education. And there's this voice in so many people's head that I need to sell them. I need to convince them to do something, for me, when in reality, the best salespeople are leading with education, understanding of value, to your point of even just asking better questions. So you mentioned Neil Rackham's book, Spin Selling, which is an excellent book. As you're talking to sales professionals, how do you get people to make that shift, right? Get out of their own head of they need to be this vision of what they view a salesperson to be and really get to be an effective salesperson?
That's a great question. And I'll give you two examples. We view sales as a profession, right? And if you're a professional, what do you do? So you learn, you study. When people ask me, what should I be doing to be successful at sales? I say, understand your customer's marketplace intimately, understanding the legal challenges, understanding the evolution, understanding what's going on, not just with your customer, but your customer's customer. So there's two things I'm going to reference. One is there was a great book put out by a woman called Lisa Earle McLeod called Sales is a Noble Profession. And she talks about exactly what you just talked about. It's a lot of times the great sales professionals that we interface with, they're in sales because of a mission. Maybe you're selling medical devices because your mother died of cancer when you were a child. And you said, hey, I'm going to try to eliminate as much of that as possible. Or you go into financial services sales because you saw your parents go bankrupt or something or lose a business. So what is that underlying noble purpose that you have? And I highly recommend Lisa's book. The other thing too is, a lot of people say things like, well, I don't want to be salesy, like you're just kind of alluding to, Dustin. We used to be known when we created our organization as the Institute for Excellence in Sales and Business Development, because a lot of people said, well, I'm in business development or I'm in account services. You know what? We're here to service the sales professional. So we dropped the NBD. So we've been known since 2015 as the Institute for Excellence in Sales. And sometimes I'll get invited to a company. Usually it's not a company with a lot of salespeople. It's with a lot of service professionals. And that's where the mentality is, I'm not in sales. I'm not going to sell, and then we go through this process where, and I've done this a whole bunch, probably a couple dozen times over maybe a half a day. And we'll put up some flip charts and we'll say, what are some words that you think about when you hear the word salesy, pushy, aggressive, abrupt, those kinds of things. And people scribble them down and they laugh. And then we eventually get to flip chart number 2 or 3, which is talk about how a salesperson has helped you over the last 2 or 3 times you've gone to a store or bought a service. Helpful, supportive, caring, willing, words that come up that are very service driven. The other thing we talk about a lot is the great sales professionals are servant leaders. And what does it mean to be a servant leader? Well, it means to support your customer with the understanding of what is their mission. What does my customer need to do? Well, if you're selling to financial services, then they're trying to help their customers get solvent and pay for college and buy a house and get out of debt, whatever it might be. If you're selling to a hospital, obviously they're trying to promote health, et cetera. At the root cause of almost everything who's a legitimate buyer, there's a mission. And the great sales professionals believe they're in service and they believe that they're servant leaders. That's a great question.
Yeah. One of the stories I often use with our team is Apple versus Android. Right. So, if you're an Apple person or you're an Android person and you're talking to your friend and they're debating what phone to get, everybody's had that conversation. Right. And guess what? They're not getting paid by Google or Apple to pitch their phone. Right. I mean, it's really just because they're genuinely asking questions. They're generally looking out for their friend's best interest and like, well, this is why I chose this, or this is why I chose that. And you're right. It's that just shifting that mindset to how do you help them achieve their goals, what they're trying to get done. And then, suddenly you don't feel like a salesperson. You feel like somebody helping them along the way.
Well, I'll give an example from your industry, from insurance. I'm based in the Washington, DC area. There's a guy's name is Alan Meltzer, and he was probably the top insurance sales guy. He created a company called the Meltzer Group, which eventually was sold to NFP. I interviewed him at 6:00 in the morning, right? Because I wanted to really interview this guy. This was before the pandemic. Met him at his office. He said, or his assistant said, he'll let you interview him, but you got to be here at 6. So I got to his office at 5:00, and I sat in the parking lot. 6 in the morning. This was, and he basically has spent his whole career selling life insurance and medical benefits. And I said to him, do you love what you do? Because he's known as being this amazing salesperson. He says, to be honest with you, he goes, I hate selling medical benefits. It's competitive. It's nickel dime, all those kinds of things. He says, but I love selling life insurance because I know that it's going to provide value when a high net earner passes away. And he says, I know what their life is going to be like after this person passes. And it brings me so much joy and satisfaction knowing that I am helping them have the next 20 years of their life without having to worry about the finances now that the major wage earner has passed.
Yeah. It goes right back to your why, right? Like, what's your why? What's your mission? If you're not rooted in that, it's short-lived.
Exactly.
Yeah. So along those lines, one of the things I've through your talking and just following you for a while, there's this undertone of serving others that seems to be in everything you do. When did that switch happen? Right. And not that you're selfish to begin with, but it seems like a lot of successful people, when they're starting in their career, it's about how do they get better and how do they advance. And then there's this point in time where you start to realize it's really not about me. It's really about what's the impact I can make on others. Can you talk a little bit about that shift for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. And I've given this a lot of thought. I've always been on charitable boards and those kinds of things. And when I worked at Apple and Compaq and CompuWare, the great salespeople, the most successful ones, they were raising money for leukemia or for maybe the homeless shelters, if you will. They were all involved with that. And maybe they didn't, some of them were very vocal and you knew that this guy was involved with diabetes research or cancer. When I worked at a company called CompuWare, the CEO, Pete Carmanos, was a huge supporter of breast cancer awareness and cures. All of the great salespeople, they have a cause. Either if it's coaching a little league softball, game or something like that, to the last person. And it goes back to some notions that, it's really not about you. It's about the customer and the ones who believe it's about the customer or who you're serving. For me personally, I've given this a lot of thought because I've always been on some boards and did a lot of volunteering and those things. As Chris mentioned in the introduction, about 2 years ago, again, we're doing today's interview in February of 2023. In the late spring of 2021, someone in my life who has what's called chronic Lyme disease had a major flare. And in order for me to understand what this person was going through, I just became a student of Lyme disease. I read every book on chronic Lyme disease. I eventually wrote my own book, which is called Love, Hope, Lyme, what family members, partners, and friends who love a chronic Lyme survivor need to know. I've also started my second podcast on Love, Hope, Lyme, interviewing people about what people need to know. But I'll be very blunt. It goes back to my mother. I've given this a lot of thought. Why am I vibe? Why aren't other people? My mother was involved with raising money for local hospitals and women's groups. And she was very involved, of course, with Scouts when I was a kid. But, it was like, I remember her going to meetings like every night. And my father was also minded that way too. But he was working, as our parents did in the 70s. He was an accountant. I recollect him leaving at 8, coming back at 11. But my mother had the service mentality, and she was recognized as Woman of the Year at various places. She was an executive director for a school for homeless youth located in the Middle East, and just seeing a parent with that type of a drive. But then again, just like I said, the great salespeople that I've worked with, the great leaders, they're all involved with this. You have to be supporting your community. Maybe there's a disease that you're committed to raising funds for. But I go back to the Einstein quote, which is my mantra, which is only a life lived in the service of others is a life worth living. So that's really where a lot of our focus is. It's
Fred,
a great question. Thank you.
Excellent.
You said something before about helping businesses. You mentioned it while you were speaking earlier about 2 or 3 times in the same paragraph. And I feel like that is, you're not really in sales if you're helping businesses. And specifically, I think if that's the case, you really have to be a student or an expert of your industry, whether that's insurance, social media, marketing, whatever. To me, what if you're not? And do you feel like that is maybe what's missing for the people who are struggling in sales? Is they don't have the knowledge, they're not that thought leader in that industry.
That's a great question. That's a very perceptive question. Like we talked about before, customers can get whatever information they want. Let's say that they're buying a CRM system or something like that, just a random thing. They can go to their phone and say, Siri, tell me the top 3 CRM systems right now for large companies. And within a millisecond, Siri's going to say boom, boom, and boom, whatever the technology is, whatever the service might be. So customers don't really need you the way they used to need you 15, 20 years ago in sales. Salespeople 15, 20 years ago were walking brochures. I remember when I was at Apple and Compaq and CompuWare, we would do full day vision sessions, our vision of our technology for the next 3 to 5 years. And we would get 20, 30 people, judiciously taking notes. Well, customers can get that information. So they need to know that you're bringing them value. And the value could be things like, how do I work with your company? What's the best way to use your technology, and et cetera? Or can you give us some thoughts? But the best salespeople, they are students. Dustin mentioned that a couple of times. They're always studying not just how to be a better sales professional, how to be more persuasive, how to be a better communicator, how to use like social media, right? I was interviewing, sales VPs on my Sales Game Changers podcast. And for most of them, it was their first time on social media. It was the first time talking about them. A lot of times they've spoken about their products and services, but this was their first time being exposed. And we tell them all the time, you got to be more present on LinkedIn. You may want to consider Instagram or Twitter. TikTok might be a little bit out there for some of them, but it's you are the vehicle. I did a podcast of my Sales Game Changers this morning, and I asked the sales leader for his advice, and he said, the sales professional is the value prop, right? How are you bringing value in every engagement? And the only thing that customers want from you now is advice, either solicited or unsolicited, on how I, the customer, can bring more value to my customer. Maybe there's some niceties about, how's the family, those kind of things. But for the most part, how can you help me be of more value to my customer? Because my customer is struggling with their customer, and my customer's customer is struggling with their customer. And you know what? You don't wing it. Doesn't happen to you as you're getting ready to hit the Zoom button 1 minute before the schedule. It happens when you're studying on Sunday morning, or when you're talking to people in the industry. When people are young, I have a couple of children who are in their 20s, and some of their friends have gone into sales, and they've said, what can I do? I say, let's meet for coffee. Ask me any question you have. And I'll tell you. For people out there, I say, go talk to your parents' friends. Your father probably has a friend who's a CIO in the insurance industry. Go ask them to meet you for coffee at Starbucks or the local diner. They'll do it, and come prepared with the questions and become a student of the industry that you're serving. And also, just one thing I want to say too is sales is a profession. So you also need to be presentable. You need to know how to present over the Zoom screen, et cetera. You need to how to ask, Dustin mentioned before, how to ask the right questions. You need to know how to ask for referrals. You need to know how to interact on LinkedIn or social media as well. It is a profession. So you need to be excellent at both of those things.
Let's take it one step further. I've seen good salespeople but working for a company where they don't 100% believe in the service or the company, meaning maybe they don't believe they're better than the competitor, or maybe they don't believe that if they buy this service, they're going to be 100% happy. What do you do in those situations?
Yeah. I'm reflecting back on one. I'm going to tell a very brief story and then I'll answer the question. I worked for a company in 2001. I was the VP of marketing, and the company made data storage devices. And the two big players in the space at that time were companies called EMC and NetApp. So there was a whole bunch of startups like there is now in the marketing technology and sales technology world of companies that wanted to become the next NetApp or whatever. We got some money. So we hired 8 sales professionals, and we had one in California. So I made a trip out to California and I met with this guy, and he brought his girlfriend to the dinner. It's 2001. It was before 9/11, but he brought his girlfriend, and we met at this place in Long Beach, and he was wearing flip flops and a t-shirt. And I'm like, I'm from corporate. I'm like, you brought your girlfriend. I don't mind someone bringing their wife, but this was like his new girlfriend, and she was dressed, not appropriately well. She went to the bathroom, and I said, "What the hell's going on here?" He said, "Listen," he goes, I've been selling data storage for 10 years. I'm going to sell it for the next 20 years. Our product isn't there yet. He said, I can't sell our product because I'm going to need to be selling data storage to these people for the next 20 years. We need to fix our product to do this, this, and this. And until then, I'm just not going to sell. And I was like, I had never heard that. Because again, I worked for Apple Compact and CompuWare, where we had the professional of the professionals selling our stuff. Nobody who was unprofessional could last a day. And I went back to corporate and I told the VP of sales, this is what happened. And he kind of shrugged it off and he said, I know that. And I'm also waiting for the new product and I really can't push them because our product doesn't do what it needs to do. I would say though, and that's always kind of stuck with me. The guy's name is Doug. It was 21 years ago, but I remember it as if it were yesterday. If the person's not on board, you got to get them out of there. It's the Jim Collins expression from Good to Great is that you got to have the right people in the bus in the right seats. And everybody is so precious now. When I was at Apple, we had a year's training before we started selling things, product and personality training and mentoring and all those things. Now, if you get 2 weeks of onboarding, you're lucky. Right. Yeah. So it's up to you to understand what you need to sell. And it's up to the managers to make sure that, they're training their people the right way. But if you're a manager and you have someone who's in that space, Chris, you got to get them off the bus. Maybe there's a better place for them. Maybe in marketing or support or something, maybe you put them on the phones for a little bit. But if they don't believe that they don't have that passion, your show, the hustle show, if you don't have the hustle mindset and the passion to communicate, because that communication is going to come across to customers, and you don't get like 7x24 to communicate to customers. You get one time, maybe every 6 months in a new situation. So it's up to corporate leadership and management, I believe, to flush those people out of the sales process and maybe into a different role or maybe out of the company.
One of the question and the thing I've seen in sales a lot that I want your perspective on. So sometimes the kind of the most talented salespeople end up fluttering in a sales profession because they've, through life and through business, they've been able to sell enough just by being them. Maybe they're charismatic, maybe they're just generally persuasive. But then you see those that maybe have that less skill innate, but they are committed to the profession. They're committed to a process and a repeatable process and that discipline that just blow by these what would seem like more experienced, more successful salespeople. I've always thought, how do you get through to more of those kind of innately talented people, the value of the process and continuous improvement so that, they can have true breakthrough success as opposed to sometimes fluttering in the middle?
No, that's a great question. And, are you guys baseball fans?
Yeah.
Okay.
Enough.
So I'm a Philadelphia Phillies baseball fan, and I listened to an interview recently with our president of baseball operations. And for those of you who are baseball fans, the Phillies have some $300 million stars, Bryce Harper, Trey Turner, a couple pitchers. And he said the only way to success is by having true stars. but you also need to flush out the roster. You're not going to have 25 guys getting paid 300 million. You're going to have other guys. You need the guys in the relief. You got the guys at the end of the bench, to play well enough so that you keep winning. I think the same thing happens in a sales organization. Is the people who are at the bottom, they're not going to make it to the next level. Doesn't matter how much drive they have. You got to either flush them out or keep bringing in other options who may be able to get to the next level. Sales is hard. You might be at the right place at the right time. I remember I mentioned a company I worked for called CompuWare in the late 90s. They sold software for mainframes and for client servers. The big issue in 1998 through 1999 was year 2000, making mainframe software work on January 1st, 2000. Well, it was a huge problem for mainframes. So every sales professional who was selling the mainframe chunk of software, they were making $500,000, $800,000, $1 million because customers needed it. The guys and ladies who were selling the same exact product, but in the client server space where year 2000 wasn't a problem, they were making base, 70, 80.
Yeah.
There was no difference between the mainframe guys and the client server guys. It was right place at right time. And I give those guys a lot of credit for that. If somebody wants to be great in sales and they have the drive and they have the energy and they really want to be successful in their career, they can be if they're at that level. There's so many resources. You could go on YouTube. You could listen to my podcast. There's 20 million videos on YouTube, I think. LinkedIn Learning on things you could do, how to prospect better, how to ask better questions. But you got to do it. Sunday morning, from 8 to 10, before you meet the family for breakfast or before you meet your friends for brunch, whatever it might be, it is up to you. I get a book sent to me every day on sales performance. People want to be on my podcast, and every day I get a new book sent to me. They got to get rid. Those books were written to get read, and you read one of them, there's going to be a difference. You find a mentor, who's going to guide you along. But you know what? It really is up to you. It's up to you. It's up to you to hustle, man. It's up to you to do it. But there's so many resources available to people. They just got to take advantage of them. But just real briefly, if you're at the bottom rung, you ain't going to make it. Maybe you stick around for a year, but then you'll flush yourself out, or the company will flush you out. If you're a good human being, maybe they'll move you into a different function in support or marketing or service. But it's up to you. And there's so many resources. And if you're listening to this conversation, if you're a subscriber, to the Hustle Mindset podcast, then you have that drive, Hustle Nation, I'm sorry, to have that drive to take your life and your career to the next level. Then good for you. And good for you for listening to this 35-minute show that we're doing right now. You're a winner.
Hey, Fred. So I want to talk about closing. So being an entrepreneur, being a business owner, on every platform, I'm getting ads about closing programs, sales programs. And so often a lot of the content I'm served is about closing. And it feels as though a lot of these sales professionals think that we in sales don't know how to close. And maybe that's our problem. I feel maybe a little different, and I'd love to hear your opinion, that if you're good enough to get to close, you've done everything good. And as a byproduct, sometimes it sells itself. Or I don't know that closing is always that important in every industry. But what's your take on that? Is there a way to close? Is it that important? Or if you go through the process, you get there, the client's going to want to do business with you?
So that's a great question. And I'll refer to a couple of things. There's a guy named James Muir, M-U-I-R, who wrote a book called The Perfect Close. And in a typical enterprise or B2B, large B2B deal, there's a moment when a transaction happens, right? When you need to sign the contract or you need to get the check, if you will. There's some sirens going on.
I was going to say, what you do over there, Fred?
I did nothing. I'm on the 20th story of a building in downtown Jacksonville, so they're pretty loud. But, in the sales mentality, to close, there may be 42 closes to get to the transaction. I always say the most important thing in a meeting is to get to the next meeting. A friend of mine, his company tracks sales calls, and they record sales calls, and they then analyze them through AI and all these types of things. They've reviewed, this was about 10 years ago, they reviewed over 5 million calls. And I said, what is the one thing that you learned? He said, people don't ask for follow-up. People don't ask for the next step. People don't ask for the next meeting. So they'll end the call without a close, right? Where the close on that call should be, can we talk next Tuesday? I'm going to send you a document. Or who else do we need to bring into this conversation? Do we need to bring in finance now, or whatever, support or legal, whoever, compliance, whoever it might be? And you need to close that to get to the next close. I think at the heart of your question, though, you're asking, what if people were afraid to ask for the deal or ask for money? They better deal with that. There's a lot of assessment tools out there that will help you understand your relationship to money and your relationship to asking for money. And through these assessment tools, if they can detect that you struggle with that, and it's not easy, it's very hard. People are afraid. Even the top salespeople are afraid of rejection. What if they say no? Well, you know what? If they say no, move on to the next one, get the objections handled. A lot of times, no isn't no. My friend Andrea Waltz has a program called No Isn't No. So maybe no means you need some more information or you need something else, but you got to get past that fear. It's a fear that's in your head. It's not real. The fear of asking for the deal, the fear of saying, here's my price. I'll give you one example, which is the best lesson I ever learned. When I was consulting, I was approached to consult for a particular large company, and I had my price, what I charged per month. And a friend of mine who's about 15 years older than me was the outsourced chief operating officer for that company. He had a gig that similar to what I was looking for on the marketing side. And I had a meeting with the president, and he liked me, and the president asked me for a proposal. So I sent the proposal to my friend who was the outsourced COO, and he wrote me back. He said, double your price. Nothing else. He said, double your price. And I wrote back, I said, seriously? He said, yeah. He goes, double your price. And I doubled my price, sent it to the president. The president said, okay, good. He goes, can you start on the 1st of the next month, July 1st? Double my price. And I didn't understand. I thought I had a certain metric of value. And in the span of 5 minutes, I realized that my value to this company was half of what I thought it was. And the good thing for me was that client lasted for 18 months. So, I had that price locked in as a consultant for 18 months. But if you're afraid, you just got to get over it. It's in your head. There's plenty of, I see Hustle Mindset, on Dustin's screen there. It's all a mindset, and you got to get past it if it's a block that you're facing.
Speaking of that, is it fair to say if you value your time as a sales professional, your client is likely to value your time and maybe even therefore value your service?
That's a great question. I mean, yeah, it's, I'll give you one example. I had another guy on my the Sales Game Changers podcast, and he came to the realization that for him to make $1 million, he wanted to make $1 million a year. He said, that's basically $500 an hour. So he said he outsourced everything under $500 per hour. And the example that and this was a sales guy at a company. This wasn't an independent consultant. This wasn't the CEO or the CRO or something like that. This was an account executive who wanted to make $1 million. So he said he paid one of the secretaries in their office to do his expense reports. He said he paid her $100. He gave her all the information, and he said, just do this for me. And she said she'll do it for $100 or $150, whatever she offered. Every month he did that. He made $1 million by outsourcing anything less than $500 per hour. That's the value that he saw in himself. And that's the heart of your question, Chris, is brilliant. Is if you see yourself less for whatever reason it might be, get to the heart of that, do some therapy if need be, or, do some meditation and observe why you don't have that mindset, because it's in your head. Like I said, figure out a way to get the courage to get past it and put that into action as well. The top salespeople out there, yeah, they struggle too. I mean, the pandemic happened, and for 6 months, nothing happened. 2020 was going to be everyone's best year. And then for 6 months, it was nothing. Well, what did the sales professionals do? Yeah, they understood that they were going to struggle. Well, they went back to their company and said, you better change our commission. And they said, how do I get better at something? It wasn't making sourdough bread for most of those people, or doing Pokemon. It was probably, being better as a professional, maybe being better as a writer. Maybe learning how to do TikTok videos or Instagram, whatever it might be. How can you get better to feel that you are at the level of your customer where you should be.
That's awesome.
That's actually helpful for me. So thanks.
Well,
Great
Fred,
question.
let's put a bow on the conversation. For those listening, let's share some final thoughts on sales. Obviously, if you're paying attention, you're interested in this subject, you're maybe working in sales. What are some final thoughts or maybe some final tips you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I mentioned them before, but sales is a noble profession. Sales is a great profession. We talk about sales proudly. We don't deal with anyone who says, "Oh, it's kind of icky." That's not where we're not in that space. We talked before about ways to handle that, but it's a noble profession. It's the most important profession in your company. Your company is not going to survive if you aren't selling. If you're a 3-person shop, if you're a 1-man shop, if you're a consultant, you're not a consultant. You're selling your services. So everything that you do is about that. Like we talked about, be a student, listen to podcasts, ask for mentors. But from just a basic question about how to get great in sales, just truly understand a customer. I live in the Washington, D.C. area. There's a couple of very wealthy areas. DC is a very wealthy city. And there are a couple towns where every house is worth at least $1.5 million, $2 million. And I say the people living in those houses, besides the lobbyists, the people living in those houses are the guy who sells Dell to the Navy and the guy who sells chairs to, Department of State, or the guy who sells conference tables to Marriott. There's a lot of hospitality companies that are based in the DC area. Selling big brands to big companies is the easiest way to great career, but you're not going to be the guy selling Dell to the Navy. It's going to take you 20 years, 30 years to get there, but the journey is going to be rewarding. You're going to meet great people. You're going to deal with amazing customers that you're helping who are going to be grateful for you. And you're also going to be providing a great living for your family and your children.
Good stuff. I love it. Well, for those listening who want to connect with you, where can they find you? And you want to take a second to talk about your book, any of the services that you're currently offering?
Yeah, the best place to find me, where you and I found each other, Chris, is LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn. For that matter, I'm always on Facebook. Usually when I'm on Facebook, though, I'm either talking about something my children did or Lyme disease. Like I mentioned, I have my book, Love, Hope, Lyme, and I've met thousands of people on Facebook. Yeah, I'm also on Instagram and Twitter, but I usually just kind of lolly around those. But LinkedIn, for the people listening here, reach out to me via LinkedIn. When you send your connection, mention that you heard me on the Hustle Nation podcast with Chris and Dustin, and I'll definitely interface with you. And it'll lead to something like this. You invited me to be on your podcast, and it's been great to get to know you and Dustin here and to see what you're doing, and to meet another guy who went to college in Michigan. Dustin, where'd you go to school? Did you go to school in Michigan as well?
I went to Marquette University in Wisconsin.
Okay.
Yep.
Very good.
Yep.
I was just talking to someone about Al McGuire the other day. So
he's the man for sure.
Just a random conversation. May he rest in peace. But so it leads to things like this. And, having a podcast for people listening to is probably one of the best ways to develop relationships. I started my podcast in 2017, the Sales Game Changers podcast. We're over 600 episodes. I'm probably in relationship with 95% of the people that have been on the show, at least, can we talk type of conversation. Some are great friends, have become great friends. And definitely reach out to me via either LinkedIn or Facebook.
Awesome. And where can they find the podcast?
So salesgamechangerspodcast.com. It's on Apple and Spotify, all the usual places, but you can go to salesgamechangerspodcast.com. And the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast, again, we're doing today's show in February. It's going to be launching sometime in the middle of March. And that was created for people who love a chronic Lyme survivor to understand how to support that person. But I just want to acknowledge you guys for asking great questions and for, getting a show started. I know what it takes to process a show and to think through, who do you want on and who are your listeners and how's it going to help you? So, good job. And, it'll be nice to watch you guys as you continue your growth of the Hustle Nation show.
It's awesome. Thank you, Fred. Yeah,
Thank you, Fred.
I appreciate you certainly taking the time. I think, you gave us a lot of insight, a lot of things to think about, but probably the biggest thing was it's up to you, right? You can talk about all these things, but at the end of the day, it's up to you. You got to consider it a profession. You got to do the work, go out and do it yourself, and it's out there.
Just last thought is, you may be the VP of sales for Johnson Industries, but you're the CEO of your career. And, how do you treat your career as the CEO? And like you just said, Dustin, it's up to you, and there's no excuses. Things may go wrong. Okay. You figure it out, you get some help, you process it, but there's no excuse for not hustling, not getting started, and for tapping into the resources that are available to you.
Sure.
Amen. What a great way to end. Fred, thank you so much. We appreciate you being on the show. For all of you who turned in today, thank you so much for your ears. We'll see you next time. Peace.
Thank you for being part of the Hustle Nation. If you're serious about raising the bar in your personal and professional life and willing to go all in on your success, head over to hustleleaders.com. Here you can get access to our Hustle Productivity ebook, attend our Hustle Masterclass, or challenge yourself to the 30-day Hustle Challenge. Pairing these tools and training with the Hustle Nation podcast will help you advance to a whole new level. Until next time, stay hungry and inspire those around you to hustle.